Imagine trusting someone with your life, fighting alongside them, sharing meals, trading jokes in the heat of battle. Now imagine them turning their weapon on you without a moment's hesitation. This isn't just another war story. This is Order 66, perhaps the most perfectly executed betrayal in galactic history. You've probably heard whispers about it. The day the clone troopers turned. The day the Jedi fell. But what you might not know is how deep this conspiracy really went. A plot so intricate, it began before the Clone Wars even started, nestled in the DNA of every single clone trooper. When people talk about Order 66, they often focus on the numbers. Thousands of Jedi killed in mere hours, millions of clones acting in perfect synchronization across the galaxy. But the real story, it's about brothers turning on brothers, about trust shattered in an instant, about how one man's decades-long plan brought the most powerful peacekeepers in the galaxy to their knees. This isn't just about Emperor Palpatine's masterstroke or the fall of the Republic. This is about the clone who had to watch his own hands kill his Jedi general. The Padawan who saw her master gunned down by the troops they'd trained with that very morning. The moment when the galaxy realized that sometimes the greatest enemies aren't the ones you're fighting. They're the ones fighting beside you. This is the story of Order 66. Deep within the sterile laboratories of Camino, where endless waves crash against gleaming white cities, a secret was being buried. Not in files or hidden vaults, but in the minds of millions of unborn soldiers. Clone Protocol 66 wasn't just another contingency order. It was the linchpin of the greatest deception the galaxy had ever seen. Think about it. Millions of identical men, each carrying the same hidden command in their heads, each one a ticking time bomb, though they'd never know it. The Kaminoan scientists, renowned across the galaxy for their cloning expertise, worked with surgical precision to embed these biochips during the earliest stages of embryonic development. But they weren't working alone. Behind those elegant, long-necked Kaminoan scientists stood a shadow, the influence of the Sith. These masters of deception had orchestrated every detail, every genetic manipulation, every neural pathway. The biochip itself was a masterpiece of biological engineering, disguised as a simple behavioral modification device. To prevent aggression, they said. To ensure compliance, they claimed. The perfect cover story for the perfect weapon. The process itself was a marvel of scientific precision. Each clone embryo, barely formed in their growth chambers, underwent a delicate procedure. The biochip, no larger than a grain of sand, was carefully integrated into their developing neural network. The Kaminoan scientists had perfected the technique to such a degree that the chip became virtually indistinguishable from natural brain tissue. It was, in every sense, a part of them from the very beginning. But here's where it gets interesting. The Jedi, for all their Force sensitivity and wisdom, never suspected a thing. How could they? They were fighting a war, leading these very troops into battle. The clone troopers themselves became more than just soldiers. They were brothers in arms, trusted companions, friends. Even the clones had no idea what was lying dormant in their minds. They ate with their Jedi generals, fought beside them, saved their lives countless times, all while carrying the seeds of their destruction. The Kaminoans' role in this conspiracy cannot be understated. Their facilities, their expertise, their reputation for perfection, all of it provided the perfect cover. Every detail of the cloning process was scrutinized by the Republic, except for this one crucial addition. The biochip was listed in medical files as a simple behavioral modification device, nothing more than a safeguard against the aggression supposedly inherent in Jango Fett's DNA. The true genius of the implementation lay in its redundancy. Every single clone, from the moment of their creation, carried this hidden programming. There were no gaps, no oversights, no loose ends. The Kaminoan scientists ensured that the biochip would integrate seamlessly with each clone's unique neural patterns, despite their genetic uniformity. It was a level of sophistication that went far beyond simple behavioral modification. What made the deception so brilliant was its simplicity. Hide the blade in plain sight. Make it part of the very fabric of the clone army's creation. The Jedi, in their determination to protect the Republic, never questioned why they needed an army that appeared out of nowhere, perfectly tailored to their needs. They never asked why these soldiers needed behavioral modification chips. They never suspected that their greatest allies were designed from the very beginning to be their executioners. The security surrounding Protocol 66 was absolute. The Kaminoan scientists who worked on the project were compartmentalized, each knowing only their specific part of the process. The medical droids were programmed with just enough information to maintain the chip's functionality without understanding their true purpose. Even in the vast database of clone medical records, the chips were buried under layers of routine biological data and standard genetic modifications. Each clone trooper, from the moment they took their first breath in those sterile Kaminoan growth chambers, carried this secret within them. From Commander Cody to the lowest-ranking trooper, they were all ticking time bombs. Millions of loyal soldiers, each one a sleeper agent who didn't know they were sleeper agents. The perfect troops, the perfect friends, the perfect betrayers. The irony was palpable. The very thing that made the clones such effective soldiers, their absolute loyalty, their unwavering dedication to the Republic, would ultimately be their undoing. The biochip ensured that when the moment came, not even the strongest bonds of brotherhood could overcome its programming. Years of friendship, countless battles fought side by side, innumerable lives saved. All of it would mean nothing when Order 66 was executed. On paper, it seemed innocent enough. A behavioral modification chip, standard procedure for an army of clones. Who wouldn't want a safeguard against potential aggression in millions of identical soldiers? But beneath this carefully constructed facade lay something far more sinister. This wasn't just about controlling aggression. This was about creating the perfect weapon against the most powerful peacekeepers in the galaxy. Darth Sidious, hidden in plain sight as Chancellor Palpatine, had spent decades weaving this web. The clone army wasn't just a military force. It was a time bomb planted in the heart of the Republic. Every single clone trooper carried within them the ultimate betrayal, disguised as a simple safety measure. The true purpose of these chips was far more specific, far more deadly. The complete and total elimination of the Jedi Order. Think about the brilliance of it. The chip wasn't designed to make the clones hate the Jedi. That would have been too obvious, too detectable. Instead, it lay dormant, waiting. When activated, it would override everything that made each clone unique. Their personalities, their friendships, their loyalty to their Jedi generals. All of it would be swept aside in an instant, replaced by an overwhelming compulsion to execute Order 66. The level of control was absolute. These weren't simple commands or suggestions. This was complete neural override. Imagine having your entire consciousness pushed aside, forced to watch as your body carries out actions against your will. That's what the chip did. Clones who had fought alongside Jedi for years, who had formed deep bonds of brotherhood and trust, would suddenly become nothing more than organic droids, programmed for one purpose: elimination. But here's where Sidious's true genius showed. The chip didn't just make the clones turn on the Jedi, it made them believe they were doing the right thing. When activated, it rewrote their very perception of reality. In their minds, the Jedi weren't just targets, they were traitors to the Republic, threats that had to be eliminated for the greater good. The perfect soldiers became the perfect executioners, absolutely convinced of the righteousness of their actions. This wasn't just about killing Jedi, it was about destroying them completely. The chip ensured that when the moment came, there would be no hesitation, no warning, no chance for escape. Jedi who had led clone troops for years would never see the betrayal coming. How could they? These were their most trusted allies, their brothers in arms. The Force itself couldn't warn them of danger from those they trusted completely. The override of free will was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the chip's design. These weren't mindless drones. The clones retained all their tactical training, all their combat expertise. They could still think, still plan, still coordinate. The chip simply redirected all of these abilities toward a single purpose. It was like a viral infection of the mind, using the host's own strengths against their former allies. Consider the implications. Millions of soldiers scattered across thousands of worlds, each carrying this hidden programming. When the order came, there would be no resistance, no delay, no chance for warning. The Jedi would face not just betrayal, but betrayal from those they trusted most, executed with military precision and tactical expertise. This was all part of Darth Sidious's grand design for galactic domination. The clone army wasn't just created to fight the Separatists. That was merely the cover story. They were created to be the perfect tool for the Jedi's destruction. Every battle they fought alongside the Jedi, every victory they shared, every bond they formed, all of it served to make the eventual betrayal more complete, more devastating. The true horror of the chip's purpose lay in its simplicity. It didn't need elaborate plots or complex machinations. It simply waited, hidden behind that facade of behavioral modification, until the moment came to activate it. And when that moment arrived, it would transform the Republic's greatest defenders into its most efficient executioners in the span of a single command. 3 words. That's all it took to bring down the Jedi Order. Execute Order 66. Simple, efficient, devastating. But the mechanism behind those words, that was anything but simple. This wasn't just a command. It was a key designed to unlock millions of neural time bombs simultaneously across the galaxy. Think of it as the galaxy's deadliest voice recognition system. Not just anyone could activate these hidden protocols. The biochips were specifically coded to respond to the highest levels of Republic authority. But even then, it wasn't just about rank. The chips were waiting for something specific. Authorization codes embedded within Palpatine's voice pattern itself. A biological key for a biological lock. When that command came through, when those 3 words were spoken with those precise authorization codes, something remarkable and terrifying happened. Imagine a wave of neural activity sweeping across the galaxy at the speed of a HoloNet transmission. From the core worlds to the outer rim, every clone trooper's chip activated simultaneously. There was no delay, no hesitation, no chance for second thoughts. The science behind this trigger mechanism was a marvel of bioengineering. The chips were designed to respond instantly to the specific frequency patterns in Palpatine's voice, combined with the encrypted authorization codes woven into the transmission. It wasn't enough to simply record and replay the words. The chips could detect attempts at voice mimicry or unauthorized transmissions. This was about as far from a simple voice command as you could get. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. The neural response wasn't just fast, it was complete. The moment those authorization codes hit the chip, the change was instant and absolute. Imagine millions of switches being flipped in perfect synchronization across the galaxy. One moment, these were individual soldiers with their own thoughts and loyalties. The next, they were executing a program that had laid dormant since their creation. The trigger mechanism's design revealed the true extent of Palpatine's long-term planning. He had ensured that only he, and perhaps a select few others he might designate, could issue this command. It was the ultimate failsafe. No matter how many Jedi might suspect something was wrong, no matter how many clones might question their orders, the trigger could only come from one source. Consider the precision required for such a system. The chips had to be sophisticated enough to recognize specific voice patterns and authorization codes, yet simple enough to activate instantly when triggered. They had to maintain their functionality through years of combat, injury, and stress. And most importantly, they had to be completely undetectable until the moment they were activated. The instant neural response was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the trigger mechanism. There was no warning, no build-up, no time for resistance. One moment, a clone could be sharing a meal with their Jedi general, laughing about their latest mission. The next, at the sound of those three words, everything that made them an individual would be suppressed, replaced by an overwhelming compulsion to execute their hidden programming. This instantaneous response was crucial to the plan's success. If there had been even a moment's delay, if the clones had time to question or resist, the entire operation might have failed. But the trigger mechanism ensured that by the time anyone realized what was happening, it would already be too late. The transformation from loyal soldier to executioner happened faster than a blaster bolt could travel. What made this system truly diabolical was its simplicity in execution, despite its complexity in design. A single command, broadcast across the galaxy, activating millions of sleeper agents simultaneously. No need for individual orders, no risk of mixed messages or confused priorities. Every clone who heard those words, backed by those authorization codes, would respond in exactly the same way. The psychological impact of this trigger mechanism cannot be overstated. For the clones who survived, who later remembered what happened, the knowledge that they could be controlled so completely with just 3 words was devastating. For the few Jedi who survived, the speed of the betrayal, the totality of it, would haunt them forever. One moment, everything was normal. The next, their entire world had turned against them. In a dimly lit office high above Coruscant's glittering skyline, Chancellor Palpatine, now revealed as Darth Sidious, spoke the words that would change the galaxy forever. Execute Order 66. Simple words, spoken almost casually, but carrying within them the death sentence for thousands of Jedi spread across the stars. This wasn't just the beginning of an attack. It was the culmination of decades of planning, the trigger pull on the galaxy's largest assassination. The moment was chosen perfectly. The Jedi were scattered across thousands of worlds, leading clone armies in what they thought were the final days of the Clone Wars. They were tired, their numbers already thinned by years of conflict. Most importantly, they were comfortable, surrounded by troops they'd fought beside for years, men they trusted with their lives. That trust made the perfect blind spot. When the signal went out, it spread across the HoloNet like a digital tsunami. From the core world to the farthest reaches of the Outer Rim, millions of clone troopers received the command simultaneously. One moment, the galaxy spun on as it had for millennia. The next, countless trigger fingers tightened on countless blasters, all aimed at the backs of unsuspecting Jedi. The statistics are staggering. Within the first hour, just 60 minutes, approximately 99% of the entire Jedi Order was wiped out. Think about that number. An ancient order of peacekeepers, warriors who had protected the galaxy for thousands of generations, nearly exterminated in less time than it takes to watch a holofilm. The efficiency was terrifying, the scale unprecedented. Picture it. On Megiddo, Master Ki-Adi-Mundi was leading a charge across a crystal bridge when his trusted commander Bakara and the Galactic Marines opened fire. On Felucia, Aayla Secura was cut down by Commander Bly and the 327th Star Corps Legion, who had served with her faithfully throughout the war. On Cato Nemoidia, Plo Koon's own squadron shot down his fighter, sending him crashing into the city below. Each death was personal, each betrayal intimate. The timing was surgical. Many Jedi were killed in the midst of routine activities, leading charges, planning strategies, even meditating. Some were shot down while tending to wounded troops. Others fell while sharing meals with their clone commanders. The banality of these moments made the betrayal all the more shocking. There was no grand battle, no heroic last stand, just the sudden, brutal efficiency of point-blank execution. What made the initial execution so devastating was its completeness. The clone troopers didn't just attack. They cut off all escape routes, blocked all communications, eliminated any chance of warning or rescue. Jedi trying to contact the temple found their communications jammed. Those who managed to send distress signals unknowingly led other clones to surviving Jedi. The hunters had become the hunted, and they didn't even know it until it was too late. The Force itself, that mystical energy field that had guided and protected the Jedi for millennia, provided no warning. How could it? The danger came from those whose loyalty had been absolute, whose presence in the Force had always meant safety and trust. By the time any Jedi sensed something was wrong, they were already facing the business end of a blaster, or worse, had already fallen. In that first hour, the galaxy witnessed something unprecedented, the near-perfect execution of the perfect plan. Clone troopers didn't just follow orders, they anticipated their Jedi generals' moves, knew their techniques, their strategies. Years of fighting alongside the Jedi had taught them exactly how their generals would react. This wasn't just an attack, it was the ultimate insider strike. The few Jedi who survived those first crucial minutes found themselves in a galaxy suddenly turned hostile. Safe havens became death traps, friendly faces became executioners. Every clone trooper, every military installation, Every Republic facility was now a threat. The very infrastructure they had helped build and protect was now dedicated to their extinction. While Order 66 erupted across the galaxy, the heart of the Jedi Order faced its own nightmare. The Jedi Temple, that towering beacon of hope and wisdom that had stood for thousands of years, was about to fall. And who would lead this assault? None other than Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, now twisted into Darth Vader, alongside the legendary 501st Legion, his most trusted troops. The tragedy of this moment cannot be overstated. The 501st Legion, nicknamed Vader's Fist, had fought alongside Anakin throughout the Clone Wars. They were the elite of the elite, veterans of countless battles. But on this night, their expertise would be turned toward a different kind of mission. This wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. Think about the scene, the sacred halls of the Jedi Temple, where younglings once played and Padawans trained, suddenly filled with the rhythmic march of armored boots. The 501st moved with cold efficiency, their familiar blue markings now a herald of death rather than salvation. They knew every entrance, every corridor, every defensive position, because they had once been there to protect them. The systematic nature of the purge was chilling. The 501st didn't just attack. They executed a carefully planned operation. Teams were assigned to specific sectors. Communications were jammed. Escape routes were cut off. This wasn't chaos. It was methodical, calculated extinction. The clone troopers moved through the temple with the precision of surgeons, if surgeons wielded blasters, and had come to excise the heart of the Jedi Order. But the true horror lay in what happened to the youngest inhabitants of the temple. The younglings, Force-sensitive children gathered from across the galaxy, had no chance. These were children who had grown up seeing clone troopers as protectors, as friends. Some even tried to run to them for safety, not understanding that their guardians had become their executioners. The security recordings would later reveal scenes too painful for most to watch. The Jedi archives, containing millennia of knowledge and wisdom, faced a similar fate. But this wasn't mere destruction. This was calculated theft. Palpatine wanted the knowledge contained within those ancient holocrons and texts. What wasn't seized was destroyed, ensuring that future generations would never know the true history of the Jedi. Databanks were wiped, holocrons were stolen, and thousands of years of accumulated wisdom vanished in a single night. Inside the temple, the scene was apocalyptic. Jedi Masters fought desperately to protect their students, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers and the element of surprise. Temple guards, sworn to protect the sacred site, fell at their posts. Medical droids were destroyed mid-treatment. Even the younglings' training rooms, with their tiny practice sabers and floating training remotes, became sites of unspeakable tragedy. The architectural layout of the temple, designed over millennia to be a place of peace and learning, became a killing ground. The grand hallways that had once echoed with the sounds of discussion and meditation now amplified the sounds of battle and death. The high ceilings and open spaces meant to inspire contemplation offered nowhere to hide from precision clone trooper fire. Perhaps most tragic was the role of Anakin Skywalker himself. The security recordings would later show him leading the assault, his newly yellowed Sith eyes reflecting the blue glow of his lightsaber, the same weapon that had so often been used to protect the innocent. The man who was prophesied to bring balance to the Force instead brought devastation to its most sacred temple. The 501st's efficiency was terrifying. Every room was cleared, every corner searched, every hidden passage discovered. The clone troopers' intimate knowledge of the temple's layout, gained through years of serving as its protectors, now served to ensure that no one could escape. Even the secret passages known only to the Jedi Council were discovered and sealed. By sunrise, the smoke rising from the temple could be seen across Coruscant. The building still stood, but its heart had been ripped out. The bodies of masters and younglings alike lay where they fell, a testament to the completeness of the purge. The archive, stripped of their most valuable contents, stood empty like the shelves of a ransacked tomb. The true horror of Order 66 wasn't just in its brutality, it was in its scale. From the gleaming spires of Coruscant to the furthest reaches of wild space, the Order rippled across the galaxy like a deadly shockwave. Thousands of worlds, each with their own ongoing battles, their own military campaigns, their own Jedi leaders, all experienced the same betrayal at the same moment. This wasn't just an assassination, it was a galaxy-wide execution. On Utapau, Obi-Wan Kenobi led his forces against General Grievous. On Kashyyyk, Master Yoda stood alongside Wookiee warriors. On Megiddo, Ki-Adi-Mundi pushed forward through crystalline canyons. On Felucia, Aayla Secura patrolled toxic jungles. Each of these worlds, and thousands more, became instant killing grounds. The same scene played out again and again. A command received, weapons raised, and trusted allies becoming executioners. The coordination was unprecedented. Clone commanders who had served faithfully under their Jedi generals for years turned on them in perfect synchronization. Commander Cody, moments after receiving Obi-Wan's lightsaber for safekeeping, ordered artillery fire on his own general. Commander Bly, who had fought countless battles alongside Aayla Secura, gunned her down mid-stride. These weren't just soldiers following orders, they were trusted friends committing the ultimate betrayal. But the ground attacks were only part of the picture. In space, the situation was even more dire. Jedi starfighter pilots suddenly found their own squadron mates turning their weapons on them. Imagine being in the middle of a dogfight, trusting your wingman to protect you, only to find their lasers targeting your ship instead. Master Plo Koon, one of the Order's greatest pilots, never stood a chance when his own clone pilots turned their guns on him over Cato Neimoidia. The communication blackout was perhaps the most strategically brilliant aspect of the operation. As Jedi across the galaxy faced betrayal, their first instinct was to contact the temple, to warn others, to seek guidance. But every emergency frequency, every standard channel, every secret Jedi communication line had been blocked or compromised. Those who did manage to get messages through often only succeeded in revealing their locations to hunting parties of clone troopers. Picture the scene on Botha Wui. A Jedi Master, sensing something wrong through the Force, rushes to her ship's communication array. She inputs the emergency codes, tries to raise the temple but finds only static. As she attempts to switch frequencies, her own clone commander steps onto the bridge, weapon already raised. This scene played out countless times across the galaxy, each attempt at warning others only hastening the Jedi's doom. The scope of the betrayal extended beyond just military operations. On worlds where Jedi served as peacekeepers or diplomats, local security forces were ordered to assist in the purge. Clone detachments stationed at Republic outposts began actively hunting any Jedi who might seek refuge. Even civilian spacers were warned that harboring Jedi was now a capital offense. The entire infrastructure of the Republic had been turned into a weapon against its former guardians. The space lanes, once safe passages for Jedi traveling between missions, became deadly gauntlets. Republic cruisers, previously havens of safety, transformed into traps. Jedi who managed to escape the initial betrayal found themselves unable to jump to hyperspace without risking emergence into yet another ambush. The galaxy itself had become a maze where every turn could lead to death. Consider the numbers. Thousands of Jedi spread across approximately 10,000 systems, each potentially commanding hundreds or thousands of clone troops. When Order 66 was executed, millions of soldiers turned on their generals simultaneously. The scale of coordination required was staggering. From major military campaigns to small peacekeeping operations, no Jedi was too important or too insignificant to be targeted. The psychological impact was devastating. Jedi who had spent years developing bonds with their troops, who had shared meals, saved each other's lives, celebrated victories together, all of that was erased in an instant. Some Jedi's last moments were filled not just with physical pain, but with the emotional agony of betrayal by those they had trusted most. The Force itself seemed to cry out as bonds of brotherhood were severed by plasma bolts and betrayal. In the chaos of space battles, the betrayal was particularly effective. Jedi pilots already engaged with separatist forces suddenly found themselves caught in crossfire from both sides. Republic capital ships turned their turbo lasers on Jedi starfighters. Navigation computers were compromised. Hyperspace routes were blocked, and escape vectors became kill zones. The very strategies and tactical advantages the Jedi had helped develop were now being used to hunt them down. Out of the thousands of Jedi spread across the galaxy, only a handful survived the initial wave of Order 66. These weren't just lucky survivors, they were the architects of their own salvation, each with a story that would become legend. Their escapes weren't just about physical survival, they were about carrying the legacy of an entire order on their shoulders. Master Obi-Wan Kenobi's survival on Utapau became the stuff of legend. One moment he was leading the 212th Attack Battalion against separatist forces, having just defeated General Grievous. The next, his trusted commander Cody, a man who had fought beside him countless times, was ordering an ATTE to fire on him. The blast knocked Kenobi and his Varactyl mount into a sinkhole, plunging hundreds of feet into the planet's depths. What seemed like a death sentence became his salvation. Think about the irony. The same canyons and sinkholes that had made Utapau a challenging battleground now provided the perfect escape route for Kenobi. Using skills honed over decades of Jedi training, he navigated the treacherous underwater passages, evaded clone patrols, and ultimately commandeered General Grievous's own starfighter. The hunter had become the hunted, but Kenobi's wit and connection to the Force turned near-certain death into an unlikely escape. But perhaps the most remarkable survival was that of Master Yoda on Kashyyyk. The diminutive Jedi Master, already centuries old, proved why he was considered the Order's greatest member. When the clones turned, Yoda didn't just sense the betrayal, he felt it coming a split second before it happened. In one fluid motion, he beheaded the clone troopers attempting to shoot him in the back. This wasn't just combat prowess, this was 900 years of experience and Force mastery coming into play at the perfect moment. Yoda's escape from Kashyyyk demonstrated why he had led the Jedi Order for so long. With the help of the Wookiees, particularly Chewbacca, he navigated through the clone-occupied territories, eventually making his way to a secret escape pod. The clones never stood a chance. Every search party sent to find him ended up empty-handed. The galaxy's most powerful Jedi simply disappeared into the chaos of that terrible day. Then there's the heart-wrenching tale of Caleb Dume, a young Padawan who would later be known as Kanan Jarrus. His story represents the tragedy of the younger Jedi who survived. When Order 66 came down, Caleb was with his master, Depa Billaba, on Calais. He watched in horror as their clone troops, men they had fought beside and trusted, turned their weapons on them. His master's last words to him, "Run," would echo in his mind for years to come. Caleb's survival was a combination of his master's sacrifice and his own quick thinking. He ran not just from the clones, but from everything he had ever known. He buried his lightsaber, shed his Jedi robes, and took on a new identity. Kanan Jarrus was born from the ashes of Caleb Dume, a survivor who would carry the guilt of his escape for years to come. His story shows us that sometimes survival comes at a terrible cost. But these weren't the only survivors. A small handful of others managed to slip through the cracks of the Empire's perfect plan. Jedi Master Quinlan Vos, known for his unorthodox methods, disappeared so completely that even the Empire couldn't determine if he had survived. Others, like Jocasta Nu, the former chief librarian of the Jedi Archives, initially escaped only to be hunted down later while trying to preserve Jedi knowledge. Each survivor's tale reads like a tragedy wrapped in a miracle. Some, like Taron Malicos, survived only to fall to the dark side, driven mad by isolation and paranoia. Others, like Serejunda, cut themselves off from the Force entirely, choosing a kind of spiritual death over risking detection. The price of survival was often steep, too steep for some to bear. The methods of survival were as varied as the survivors themselves. Some, like Obi-Wan and Yoda, chose complete isolation, becoming hermits on distant worlds. Others, like Kanan Jarrus, hid in plain sight, taking on mundane jobs and suppressing any obvious signs of their Jedi training. A few, driven by a combination of guilt and duty, continued to help others in secret, walking a dangerous line between preservation and exposure. What makes these survivors' stories so compelling isn't just that they lived, it's what they did with their survival. Obi-Wan became the guardian of Luke Skywalker, preserving hope for the future. Yoda maintained his connection to the Force, becoming even more powerful in his exile. Kanan Jarrus would eventually become a leader in the early rebellion, training his own Padawan and proving that the Jedi way could survive even the darkest times. To understand the true tragedy of Order 66, we need to look through the eyes of the clones themselves. These weren't mindless droids following programming. They were men, individuals who had formed deep, genuine bonds with their Jedi generals. When the Order came down, some part of them was still there, trapped inside their own minds, forced to watch as their bodies carried out actions they would have once found unthinkable. Imagine being Commander Cody. One moment you're handing Obi-Wan Kenobi his lightsaber, sharing a moment of camaraderie with a man you fought beside for years. "Here's your weapon, sir," you say. "Try not to lose it this time." A joke between friends, between brothers in arms. Then the hologram message comes through. 3 words later, you're ordering artillery strikes on the man you just joked with. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The internal struggle experienced by some clones was nothing short of psychological torture. Take Captain Rex, for example. His friendship with Ahsoka Tano went beyond the typical clone-Jedi relationship. They had saved each other countless times, shared victories and defeats, developed a trust that went beyond military hierarchy. When Order 66 activated his chip, Rex fought it with everything he had. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to warn Ahsoka, managing only to tell her to find fives before the programming took full control. Not all clones had Rex's strength of will. Commander Gray, who served under Jedi Master Depa Billaba, initially carried out Order 66 without hesitation. But in the days that followed, the weight of what he had done, attempting to kill his general and hunting her Padawan, Caleb Doom broke something inside him. The cognitive dissonance between his loyalty to the Republic and his personal bonds with the Jedi drove him to intentionally crash his ship, choosing death over living with what he had done. The severity of the mental breakdown varied from clone to clone. Some, like Commander Fox, seemed to embrace the programming completely, showing no signs of internal conflict. Others, like Commander Wolf, would carry the psychological scars for the rest of their lives. The programming didn't just override their free will, it rewrote their perception of reality. Jedi who had been trusted leaders moments before became traitors in their minds, threats that had to be eliminated for the good of the Republic. Consider the experience of the 501st Legion during the Temple Assault. These men had served directly under Anakin Skywalker, had seen his dedication to the Jedi Order firsthand. Yet, when the Order came, they marched into the temple alongside their former general, now Darth Vader, and systematically executed everyone inside, including younglings. The psychological impact of such actions would haunt many of them for years to come, though the chip prevented them from processing these emotions in the moment. The clone perspective becomes even more complex when we look at special cases like Clone Force 99, also known as the Bad Batch. Their genetic mutations made them partially resistant to the biochip's programming. Hunter, Tech, and Wrecker watched in horror as their regular clone brothers turned on the Jedi, maintaining enough of their own consciousness to understand what was happening. Their unique situation gave them a front-row seat to the tragedy unfolding around them, forced to witness their brothers becoming unwilling executioners. For the majority of clones, the activation of Order 66 created a kind of split consciousness. Their bodies acted on the programming, while some part of their mind remained aware, trapped in a mental prison. Imagine watching through your own eyes as your body turns its weapon on someone you'd die to protect, unable to stop yourself, unable to even cry out in warning. The psychological trauma of such an experience was devastating. Some clones, particularly those who had served closely with Jedi for extended periods, experienced severe psychological breaks after the fact. As the initial programming began to wear off, the reality of what they had done hit them with full force. The long-term effects on clone psychology were profound. Those who survived the war and maintained their sanity often developed various coping mechanisms. Some, like Commander Bly, threw themselves completely into service to the Empire, using absolute loyalty to the new regime as a way to avoid confronting their actions. Others, like Rex, eventually had their chips removed and had to face the full weight of their experiences, leading to years of guilt and attempts at redemption. The most chilling aspect of the clone perspective might be those who fully embraced the programming, not just in the moment, but permanently. These clones became the backbone of the early Empire, training the first generation of stormtroopers and helping to hunt down surviving Jedi. Their complete acceptance of the new reality suggested that the biochips didn't just override their free will, they fundamentally altered their personalities and belief systems. For the clones who maintained some awareness during Order 66, the experience was like being trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake from. They could feel their fingers pulling triggers, hear their own voices giving orders to execute their Jedi, but were powerless to stop it. The bonds formed through years of fighting together, the trust built through countless shared experiences, all of it was still there, just locked away behind an impenetrable wall of programming. The impact of Order 66 wasn't confined to military bases or battlefields. It played out in front of countless civilians across thousands of worlds. Imagine sitting in a Coruscant cafe, watching the HoloNet news, when suddenly the peaceful Jedi temple erupts in flames. Imagine being a citizen on Magito, watching clone troopers gun down the very Jedi who had been protecting your city moments before. The galaxy's perception of reality shifted in an instant. The response from local governments was as varied as the worlds themselves, but they all faced the same brutal choice: comply with the new regime or face immediate military consequences. On Naboo, a world long associated with peace and democracy, the Royal Council watched in horror as clone troopers surrounded the palace. The message was clear: either assist in hunting down any Jedi who might seek refuge, or face occupation. Even Queen Apailana, known for her strong moral stance, was forced to publicly denounce the Jedi while secretly helping survivors. On more militaristic worlds like Kuat, the transition was seamless, almost eager. The powerful shipyards already churning out vessels for the Republic simply switched their allegiance to the Empire without missing a beat. The local government saw which way the wind was blowing and made sure they were on the winning side. Clone troopers patrolling the streets were joined by local security forces, all working together to hunt down any Jedi who might try to use the sprawling industrial complexes as hiding places. But not every world rolled over so easily. Take Mon Cala, for instance. When Order 66 came down, their king refused to assist in the hunting of Jedi Master Sui Choi, who had helped defend their world. The response was swift and brutal. The 101st Legion was deployed to make an example of them. The ocean world's resistance became one of the first demonstrations of Imperial might, a warning to other worlds that might consider defying the new order. The civilian response was equally complex. On worlds where the Jedi had been a regular presence, where they had helped resolve conflicts and protect the population, many citizens couldn't reconcile the Empire's portrayal of them as traitors with their own experiences. Underground networks began forming almost immediately, ordinary people willing to risk everything to help surviving Jedi escape. Consider what happened on Ryloth. The Twi'lek population had worked closely with Jedi during the Clone Wars, seeing them as liberators from separatist occupation. When clone troopers suddenly turned on their Jedi generals, many Twi'leks tried to intervene. The resulting crackdown was severe, with entire villages being punished for suspected assistance to fleeing Jedi. Yet even this didn't stop the formation of secret resistance cells. The propaganda campaign that followed was nothing short of masterful. Within hours of Order 66, the HoloNet was flooded with carefully prepared footage of Jedi aggression. Security recordings were edited to show Jedi attacking clone troopers rather than defending themselves. Testimonies from loyal citizens appeared, telling tales of Jedi corruption and abuse of power. The narrative was being rewritten in real time, and many worlds found it easier to accept the new version of events than face the brutal truth. On Coruscant itself, the situation was particularly intense. Citizens who lived near the Jedi Temple witnessed the assault firsthand, saw the smoke rising from the ancient structure. The official story claimed the Jedi had attempted a coup, that the clone troopers were heroically defending democracy. But whispers spread through the underlevels, stories of escaping Padawans gunned down in the streets, of civilians who tried to help being arrested, or worse. The business sector's reaction was particularly telling. The Trade Federation, banking clan, and other major commerce guilds quickly fell in line with the new regime. Their broadcasts shifted overnight from praising Jedi peacekeepers to condemning Jedi treachery. Credits spoke louder than conscience, and the Empire's promises of order and stability were music to corporate ears. Some worlds found more subtle ways to resist. On Alderaan, Bail Organa maintained a public facade of compliance while secretly using his diplomatic connections to help Jedi escape. Similar quiet resistance emerged on worlds like Chandrila and Corellia, where local officials would accidentally delay reports of Jedi sightings or misplace intelligence that might lead to surviving Jedi. The impact on planetary defense forces was equally dramatic. Local military units that had worked alongside Jedi generals suddenly found themselves ordered to hunt their former allies. Some, like the Corellian Defense Force, dragged their feet on these orders, conveniently arriving too late when Jedi were reported in their sector. Others, particularly in the core worlds, eagerly joined the hunt, seeing it as an opportunity to prove their loyalty to the new regime. The divide between compliant and resistant worlds would shape galactic politics for decades to come. Worlds that enthusiastically embraced the Empire's anti-Jedi stance were rewarded with contracts, resources, and political favor. Those suspected of harboring sympathy for the Jedi faced increasing scrutiny and military presence. The pressure created lasting political fault lines that would eventually contribute to the rise of the rebellion. Educational systems across the galaxy were quickly reformed to reflect the new reality. Within days, curriculum changes were mandated, removing or revising any positive mentions of the Jedi Order. Children who had once played with toy lightsabers and dreamed of becoming Jedi were now taught that the Order had been a corrupt institution that needed to be eliminated for the good of the galaxy. Religious institutions faced similar pressure. Temples and organizations that had any historical connection to the Jedi were forced to publicly denounce them or face shutdown. The Church of the Force went underground, its followers maintaining their beliefs in secret while publicly appearing to embrace Imperial doctrine. In the wake of Order 66, the galaxy didn't just change, it transformed into something unrecognizable. The shift from Republic to Empire wasn't just a political transition. It was like watching a star collapse into a black hole, pulling everything into its dark new reality. The aftermath of Order 66 touched every aspect of galactic society, from the highest levels of government to the lowest levels of the underworld. Picture the scene on Coruscant. In those first few days, the smoke still rising from the Jedi Temple, now draped in Imperial banners. Clone troopers, their armor already being repainted from Republic colors to stark Imperial white, patrolling streets they once protected. The Senate, that grand institution of democracy, thundering with applause as Palpatine declared himself emperor, the very representatives of freedom cheering for its death. The transformation of the Republic into the Empire was meticulously planned and swiftly executed. Within hours of Order 66, government buildings across the galaxy were being rebranded with the Imperial crest. The Republic's logo was literally being chiseled off walls and replaced with the Empire's stark geometric symbol. This wasn't just redecorating, it was a message. The old way was dead, and it wasn't coming back. But perhaps the most chilling aspect was how the Jedi were erased from galactic history. One day, they were revered peacekeepers with 1,000 generations of history. The next, they were traitors, criminals, enemies of the state. Their names were stripped from star charts. Jedi temples became Imperial bases. Jedi academies became Imperial academies. Even using the word Jedi in public could draw suspicious looks, or worse. The clone troopers' transformation into Imperial stormtroopers marked another profound shift. These soldiers, bred for loyalty to the Republic, became the face of Imperial oppression. Their distinctive armor, once a symbol of protection and security, became a symbol of fear. The change wasn't just cosmetic. Their training shifted from peacekeeping to subjugation, from protection to control. Consider the psychological impact on the galaxy's citizens. For generations, people had grown up with stories of Jedi guardians, of force-wielding peacekeepers who would help those in need. Now, parents had to teach their children to fear what they once revered. Force-sensitive children, once celebrated and sent to the Jedi Temple for training, were now hidden away, their gifts suppressed out of fear of discovery. The economic impact was equally severe. The Clone Wars had already strained the galaxy's resources, but the Empire's military buildup took it to new levels. Worlds that had housed Jedi temples or facilities were occupied by Imperial forces, their resources redirected to the Empire's war machine. The Military Creation Act, once controversial, seemed quaint compared to the Empire's demands for resources and manpower. In the criminal underworld, a new opportunity arose. Bounty hunters who once might have worked with Jedi to catch criminals now found lucrative contracts hunting their former allies. The Empire placed enormous bounties on surviving Jedi, leading to a gold rush in the bounty hunting community. Even possession of Jedi artifacts became a profitable, if dangerous, black market trade. The Dark Times wasn't just a poetic name. It described the very real shadow that fell across the galaxy. Systems that had known relative independence under the Republic found themselves under direct Imperial control. The HoloNet, once a free medium of communication, became strictly regulated. Even personal conversations were monitored for any hint of sympathy toward the Jedi or the Old Republic. The clone troopers' evolution into stormtroopers reflected the larger changes in the galaxy. Their training became less about precision and more about intimidation. The individualism that had been encouraged under Jedi leadership was systematically stripped away. Even their armor, redesigned to be more menacing, reflected the Empire's philosophy: uniformity over individuality, fear over respect. Education underwent a complete overhaul. The Empire established new curricula that painted the Jedi as power-hungry zealots who had nearly destroyed the Republic. Young students were taught that the Empire had saved the galaxy from chaos. Historic battles where Jedi had played crucial roles were rewritten, their contributions either erased or portrayed as manipulations for power. The impact on technology and research was profound. Lightsaber construction became a capital offense. Research into kyber crystals was restricted to Imperial projects only. the Empire began systematically collecting and destroying Jedi holocrons, replacing millennia of knowledge with Imperial propaganda. Even medical research involving Force sensitivity was banned or heavily restricted. Religious and philosophical organizations faced intense scrutiny. Any group that shared even remote similarities with Jedi teachings was investigated and often disbanded. Even mentioning the Force in a spiritual context could attract unwanted Imperial attention. Survival became an art form in the days following Order 66. The galaxy that had once welcomed Jedi as peacekeepers and protectors now turned its eyes away in fear, or worse, turned them toward profit. For the scattered survivors of the Purge, every shadow held potential death, every friendly face a possible betrayal. This wasn't just about staying alive, it was about staying invisible in a galaxy suddenly designed to hunt you. Consider the psychological toll of such an existence. These were beings who had spent their entire lives connected to the Force, trained to trust their instincts, to stand and fight against injustice. Now, those very instincts could betray them. Using the Force meant leaving a signature, like lighting a beacon in the darkness. Every act of compassion, every attempt to help others, the very foundations of their Jedi training, could lead hunters right to their door. The Empire's response to surviving Jedi was nothing short of methodical extermination. They didn't just send soldiers, they created an entirely new class of hunter. The Inquisitorius, former Jedi turned to the dark side, twisted and reformed into the perfect predators for their own kind. Think about the cruel efficiency of it. Who better to hunt Jedi than those who intimately understood their training, their tactics, their very way of thinking? These weren't mere dark side adepts. They were broken and rebuilt. Their former knowledge of the Jedi twisted into weapons of pursuit and destruction. But the Inquisitors were just the tip of the spear. The Empire understood that fear and greed could be more effective tools than any task force. They placed bounties on Jedi survivors, enormous sums that could set up a hunter for life. Suddenly, every spaceport, every cantina, every trading post became a potential trap. The galaxy's vast network of bounty hunters, already skilled in tracking and capture, now turned their expertise toward Jedi hunting. It wasn't just about the credits. Bringing in a Jedi meant prestige, reputation, and future Imperial contracts. The hunted adapted, but at a terrible cost. Everything that marked them as Jedi had to be abandoned. Lightsabers, the very symbol of their order, became death sentences if discovered. Traditional robes were discarded. Even their way of carrying themselves, the confident stance of a Jedi Knight, had to be unlearned. Survivors learned to hunch, to shuffle, to blend in with the desperate masses of the galaxy's forgotten spaces. They became experts in what they had once fought against: deception. In this darkness, however, sparks of hope emerged. Not everyone bowed to Imperial propaganda. Secret networks began to form loose confederations of sympathizers who remembered what the Jedi truly stood for. These underground railroads operated in absolute secrecy, using codes and signals that even their own members didn't fully understand. A particular arrangement of goods in a shop window, a specific phrase dropped in conversation, a seemingly random pattern of lights in a docking bay, all could be signals of safe passage or warnings of danger. The ingenuity of these networks was matched only by their precariousness. Every successful rescue had to be balanced against the risk of discovery. One captured Jedi, one broken sympathizer could unravel an entire section of the network. The Empire didn't just execute those caught helping Jedi, they made examples of them, ensuring their fates were public and brutal. Yet still, there were those who risked everything to help. Think about the cruel irony of it all. The Jedi, who had spent millennia as guardians of peace and justice, were now dependent on the very types of shadow networks they had once investigated. Former criminals, smugglers, and members of the galactic underworld became unlikely allies. These weren't people who necessarily believed in the Force or the Jedi way. They were simply those who couldn't stomach the Empire's brutality or who remembered a Jedi's past kindness. The methods of survival were as varied as the survivors themselves. Some hid in plain sight, taking on mundane jobs so ordinary that no one would think to look twice. Others ventured into the unknown regions, seeking sanctuary in places so remote that even the Empire's reach couldn't follow. A few even hid in the very heart of Imperial territory, gambling that no one would expect a Jedi to be so bold or so desperate. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of the hunt was its psychological warfare. The Empire didn't just want to kill the remaining Jedi, they wanted to erase them from the galaxy's memory. Historical records were altered or destroyed. The Great Temple on Coruscant was transformed into the Imperial Palace, its archives locked away or purged. Even speaking of the Jedi with anything but contempt became dangerous. A generation began to grow up believing the Empire's version of history, seeing the Jedi not as guardians of peace, but as traitors and villains. For the survivors, this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle against historical erasure. Each one carried not just their own life, but the legacy of an entire order. Some managed to preserve holocrons or sacred texts, hiding them away for a future they might never see. Others took on apprentices in secret, passing on what they could of their knowledge while knowing discovery meant death for both teacher and student. The true horror of Order 66 reveals itself not in the grand sweep of history, but in the individual stories. The personal betrayals that played out across the galaxy in countless variations. Each clone's experience was a unique tragedy, a personal battle between programming and personality that would define the darkest moment in galactic history. Consider Commander Cody, perhaps the most chilling example of the chip's absolute control. Here was a clone who had fought alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi through the worst of the Clone Wars, who had developed a friendship so strong it transcended the usual boundaries between general and commander. Their bond had been forged in countless battles, strengthened through shared victories and losses. Yet when Order 66 activated, there wasn't even a moment's hesitation. In the midst of the Battle of Utapau, Cody's personality, everything that made him unique, was swept aside in an instant. The efficiency of his betrayal was terrifying in its precision. One moment, he was handing Kenobi his lightsaber in a gesture of trusted comradeship. The next, he was calmly ordering his artillery to fire on his former friend's position. There was no internal struggle, no dramatic moment of resistance. The chip's programming simply activated, and one of the most capable commanders in the Grand Army of the Republic became the architect of his general's intended execution. Think about what this tells us about the chip's design. Cody's case demonstrates its absolute effectiveness on even the most strong-willed clones. This wasn't a commander who blindly followed orders. This was a leader known for his tactical thinking and independent judgment. Yet all of that experience, all of that developed personality, was redirected in an instant toward a single purpose: the elimination of his Jedi general. But then we have Captain Rex, whose story reveals another layer to this tragic saga. Rex's experience with the chip represents something unique: a clone who became aware of the conspiracy before Order 66 was issued. Through his experiences with his fellow Clone Fives, who had discovered the truth about the chips at the cost of his life, Rex had been warned. This foreknowledge created a singular moment in the history of Order 66, a clone who fought against the chip's activation with everything he had. The battle that raged inside Rex's mind was unlike anything the chip's designers had anticipated. Even as the programming attempted to override his consciousness, Rex fought back. He managed to warn Ahsoka Tano, fighting against his own body's attempts to execute her. Those precious seconds of resistance, bought at the cost of unimaginable mental anguish, made the difference between life and death for his Jedi commander. This wasn't just about physical resistance. It was a battle of will against programming, of identity against imposition. Rex's struggle proved something crucial. The chips weren't invincible. With enough forewarning, with enough strength of will, there was a possibility, however slim, of fighting back against the programming, if only for a few crucial moments. Then we have the fascinating case of Clone Force 99, better known as the Bad Batch. These defective clones, with their genetic mutations and enhanced abilities, present a unique window into the chip's functionality. Their altered genetics, which gave them their superior abilities, also provided varying degrees of resistance to the chip's programming. It was as if their imperfections became their salvation, allowing them to maintain their free will when the rest of their brothers became unwitting executioners. The Bad Batch's experience during Order 66 reads like a scientific case study in the chip's limitations. Hunter, Tech, Wrecker, and Echo each responded differently to the activation signal. Their genetic divergence from the standard clone template created gaps in the chip's effectiveness, allowing most of them to retain their autonomy. This wasn't about superior willpower or foreknowledge. It was purely biological, a quirk of their unique genetics that saved them from becoming unwilling participants in the Jedi Purge. But even within this exceptional unit, we see the chip's terrifying potential. Crosshair, despite his mutations, succumbed to the programming. His case demonstrates that even among the genetically divergent, the chip could still assert control. The fact that it affected him differently than his squadmates raises haunting questions about the nature of the chip's interaction with clone genetics. Throughout the galaxy, there were isolated cases of chip malfunction, statistical anomalies in what was otherwise a ruthlessly efficient system. Some clones experienced delayed reactions. Others had moments of confusion or clarity. These cases were rare enough to not compromise the overall execution of Order 66, but common enough to provide insight into the chip's mechanisms. These malfunctions manifested in various ways. Some clones reported experiencing moments of awareness during their actions, trapped in their own minds as their bodies carried out the execution order. Others found the programming temporarily breaking down, leading to moments of horror as they realized what they had done. These cases were quickly corrected by the Empire, but their existence proves that the system, while comprehensive, wasn't perfect. The psychological aftermath for these cases was particularly devastating. Imagine the trauma of recovering your sense of self only to realize what you had done while under the chip's control. Some clones, upon breaking free from the programming, took their own lives, unable to live with the memory of their actions. Others disappeared into the outer rim, seeking anonymity and escape from their role in the galaxy's transformation. History, they say, is written by the victors. But in the case of Order 66, it wasn't just written, it was meticulously engineered, carefully distorted, and systematically propagated across an entire galaxy. The Empire's greatest triumph wasn't just the execution of Order 66, it was convincing the galaxy that it was necessary. Think about the sheer scale of this deception. This wasn't simply about erasing records or changing dates in history books. This was about fundamentally rewriting the understanding of tens of thousands of worlds, transforming heroes into villains, and making the galaxy's greatest peacekeepers into its most reviled traitors. The Empire didn't just kill the Jedi, they assassinated their very memory. The manipulation began even before the bodies of the fallen Jedi had grown cold. Palpatine's declaration of the Empire included a masterfully crafted narrative. The Jedi had attempted to seize power, to overthrow the legitimate government of the Republic. The timing was perfect. The galaxy, weary from years of clone wars, was desperate for stability. They needed to believe that someone had saved them from chaos. The Emperor provided that narrative, complete with security recordings of Jedi attempting to assassinate him, carefully edited to show exactly what he wanted the galaxy to see. But the true genius lay in how the Empire handled the clone troops' involvement. How do you explain millions of soldiers simultaneously turning on their generals? The answer was brilliant in its simplicity. You don't explain it. You celebrate it. The clones were portrayed as heroes who had remained loyal to the Republic in its darkest hour, who had seen through the Jedi's deception and acted to save democracy. Their synchronized response wasn't presented as the result of hidden programming, but as proof of their unwavering loyalty to the institution they were created to serve. Consider the layers of this deception. Official records were not just altered, they were completely rewritten. Holovids were edited, mission reports were modified, and testimonies were carefully crafted. The Jedi Temple, transformed into the Imperial Palace, became a symbol not of what was lost, but of what was supposedly saved. Every piece of evidence that might contradict the official narrative was either destroyed or sealed away in archives, so secret that most didn't even know they existed. The Empire's propaganda machine worked with ruthless efficiency. Children born after Order 66 grew up learning a very different history than what had actually occurred. In schools across the galaxy, the Jedi were portrayed as religious zealots who had accumulated too much power, who had lost their way and betrayed the very Republic they claimed to serve. The Clone Wars were reframed not as a Sith plot, but as the beginning of the Jedi's grab for power, with Count Dooku presented not as a Sith Lord, but as a disillusioned Jedi whose rebellion was a precursor to the entire Order's treachery. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of the cover-up was how it manipulated the truth about the clones themselves. The question of why these perfectly trained soldiers would suddenly turn on their Jedi generals was transformed into a story of loyalty and duty. The official narrative praised the clones' ability to see through the Jedi's deception, their unwavering commitment to the Republic even in the face of their general's betrayal. Their synchronized response across the galaxy wasn't presented as suspicious. It was celebrated as proof of their perfect training and absolute dedication. The Empire understood that the best lies contain elements of truth. Yes, the clones had been created for the Republic. Yes, they had been programmed for loyalty. But the nature of that programming, the existence of the inhibitor chips, the true purpose of their creation, all of this was buried under layers of carefully constructed falsehood. Those who dared question the official narrative found themselves facing the full weight of Imperial suspicion, their voices quickly silenced or discredited. This wasn't just about controlling information, it was about controlling memory itself. Survivors of Order 66 who had witnessed the truth firsthand found themselves questioning their own recollections as the Empire's version of events became the accepted reality. The few who dared to speak out were dismissed as conspiracy theorists or sympathizers with the Jedi Rebellion. The truth became something dangerous, something to be buried deep and never spoken of. The cover-up extended beyond official records and into the realm of cultural memory. Holodrama productions subtly reinforced the official narrative. Artists and writers who portrayed the Jedi sympathetically found their works banned or modified. Even the architecture of power was altered. The Jedi Temple, that ancient seat of wisdom and learning, was transformed into a symbol of imperial might, its very stones seeming to forget what they had once stood for. For decades, this carefully constructed lie held firm. Generations grew up knowing only what the Empire wanted them to know. The truth became legend, then myth, then barely even that. Those who remembered the real story of Order 66 grew old or died, taking their memories with them. The Empire's version of events became the only version most people ever knew. The real tragedy wasn't just in the execution of Order 66, but in how completely the truth about it was hidden. Millions of beings who had once looked to the Jedi for protection and guidance were convinced to believe they had been deceived all along. The clone troopers, themselves victims of the greatest deception, were transformed in public memory from unwilling executioners to loyal heroes who had saved the Republic from treachery. The aftermath of Order 66 cast a shadow that would darken the galaxy for generations to come. This wasn't just the end of an era, it was the beginning of a new age of fear, one where the mere whisper of Force sensitivity could mean death. Consider the documented cases we have of survivors. The young Cal Kestis, forced to suppress his abilities and live as a scrapper on Bracca, constantly looking over his shoulder, or Grogu, hidden away for decades, his very existence a secret that could bring death to anyone who protected him. These weren't isolated cases, they represented a pattern of survival through suppression and denial of one's true nature. The fear was well-founded. The Inquisitorius hunted Force-sensitive children with ruthless efficiency, turning what should have been moments of discovery and wonder into periods of terror and desperation. Parents who once might have celebrated their children's gifts now taught them to hide, to suppress, to deny who they were. We see this documented clearly in the case of the Path, an underground network that risked everything to smuggle Force-sensitive individuals to safety. The material legacy of the Jedi Order met an equally tragic fate. Their artifacts, once sacred tools of learning and spiritual growth, became highly prized black market commodities. Lightsabers, if discovered, commanded astronomical prices in underground markets. The Empire's official stance was clear. Possession of Jedi artifacts was strictly prohibited, driving these remnants of history further underground, and into the hands of private collectors. The clone veterans who carried out Order 66 faced a unique horror all their own. Their accelerated aging, a documented feature of their creation, meant they aged at twice the normal rate. This wasn't just about growing old faster. It meant they had half the normal human lifespan to process what they had done while under the chip's control. Imagine living with such memories while your body aged rapidly, the physical deterioration matching the weight of your past. Some clones, like Captain Rex, managed to remove their chips and later helped reveal the truth about the biological programming that had turned them against their Jedi generals. But these were rare exceptions. Most clones lived and died with the weight of actions they had been programmed to commit against their will, their accelerated aging giving them precious little time to reconcile with their past. The Empire's official stance transformed the Jedi from guardians of peace into traitors to civilization virtually overnight. This wasn't just propaganda, it was enforced truth. Those who spoke positively of the Jedi faced immediate suspicion. The Empire's agents actively hunted down anyone showing sympathy to the Fallen Order, forcing even basic knowledge of Jedi practices deep underground. In the decades that followed, the truth about the Jedi became increasingly difficult to find. The Empire's systematic erasure was so complete that by the time of the Battle of Yavin, many believed the Jedi to be nothing more than a myth. Even the Force itself was dismissed by many as simple superstition, despite the fact that its power had been demonstrated countless times throughout history. Consider the massive cultural shifts we can document in the wake of Order 66. The galaxy's center of spiritual and philosophical teaching didn't just disappear, it was actively replaced. Cities and settlements that had once hosted Jedi temples found themselves with empty monuments stripped of their artifacts, their very architecture serving as a reminder of what was lost. On Ilum, the sacred planet where Jedi younglings once gathered kyber crystals in the time-honored tradition of constructing their first lightsabers, the Empire established a massive mining operation, eventually transforming the entire planet into Starkiller Base. The impact on those who had directly worked with and supported the Jedi Order was immediate and severe. The Jedi Service Corps, which had employed countless non-Force-sensitive individuals in agricultural, medical, and educational roles, was disbanded overnight. These support networks, built over centuries, didn't just disappear. They were actively hunted down and eliminated. The Empire understood that destroying the Jedi meant destroying not just their warriors, but their entire support structure. The fate of the younglings and Padawans who survived the initial purge tells a particularly dark chapter of this story. Those who escaped the Temple massacre faced a galaxy that had suddenly become hostile to their very existence. Many were hunted down by the Inquisitors, former Jedi themselves who had been turned to the dark side and trained specifically to track and eliminate survivors. The Grand Inquisitor, once a Jedi Temple guard, used his intimate knowledge of Jedi training to devastating effect in hunting down these young survivors. One of the most profound changes came in how the galaxy viewed Force sensitivity itself. What had once been seen as a gift, something to be celebrated and nurtured, became a death sentence. Medical facilities that had once conducted midi-chlorian tests as part of standard infant care now actively avoided such screenings, knowing that positive results would mean marking a child for Imperial attention. This wasn't just policy, it was survival. There's a certain dark irony in how the Empire transformed one of the galaxy's greatest atrocities into its most celebrated holiday. Empire Day, marking both the execution of Order 66 and Palpatine's declaration of the New Order, became more than just an anniversary. It was the foundation stone upon which the entire Imperial mythos was built. A masterwork of propaganda that turned massacre into celebration. The official Imperial narrative was preserved in stunning detail through their own records and broadcasts. In the Emperor's first Empire Day address, he presented Order 66 not as the culmination of a Sith plot, but as the salvation of civilization itself. The carefully edited security recordings from the Jedi Temple showing the attempted arrest of Palpatine by Mace Windu and other Jedi Masters became the cornerstone of Imperial propaganda. These images were broadcast throughout the galaxy, presented as irrefutable proof of the Jedi's treasonous intentions. Within the Imperial Academy system, Order 66 was taught as the perfect military operation. Cadets studied the precision with which millions of troops executed their orders simultaneously across thousands of worlds. The synchronized response of the clone army was presented as the ultimate example of military efficiency and unwavering loyalty. Training manuals highlighted how every clone trooper, regardless of their personal relationship with their Jedi generals, unfailingly carried out their duty to the Republic. The Imperial Military Academy on Carida made Order 66 a central part of its curriculum. Cadets were required to study the tactical details, how clone commanders maintained operational security, how they coordinated their attacks, how they prevented any warning from spreading between Jedi. The personal aspects, the relationships between clones and their generals, the trust that was betrayed, were stripped away, leaving only cold military precision to be admired and emulated. The true legacy of Order 66 can be measured not just in the immediate casualties, but in how fundamentally it altered the trajectory of galactic civilization. This wasn't merely a military action or political maneuver. It was an event that would reshape how entire generations viewed power, trust, and the Force itself. In the decades following the fall of the Empire, the full scope of Order 66's impact continued to reverberate through galactic politics. The New Republic, emerging from the ashes of the Empire, was shaped profoundly by these lessons. Their military structure was deliberately designed to prevent any repeat of such widespread betrayal. The Resistance, later facing the First Order, maintained a decentralized command structure, specifically because of how efficiently Order 66's centralized command had enabled mass betrayal. Luke Skywalker's attempts to rebuild the Jedi Order carried the weight of Order 66's legacy. His new temple incorporated lessons learned from the fall of the Old Order. The recovered Jedi texts and holocrons from this period show how deeply the memory of Order 66 influenced his approach to training new Force users. His students learned not just the ways of the Force, but the history of how the previous order fell. The clone troopers who survived into retirement faced a particularly brutal legacy. Their accelerated aging meant most were physically elderly, while chronologically still young. Records show how these veterans were largely abandoned by the empire they helped create. Many ended up in Imperial retirement facilities, their bodies failing them decades before a natural human lifespan would have ended. Captain Rex, one of the few to have his chip removed, served as a living testament to both the horror of Order 66 and the possibility of redemption. The impact on Force-sensitive individuals was profound and documented across multiple sources. The need for secrecy became paramount, creating a generation of Force users who had to learn to suppress rather than celebrate their gifts. The physical legacy of Order 66 can be traced through the fate of Jedi temples and artifacts. The Great Temple on Coruscant, transformed into the Imperial Palace, stands as perhaps the most visible symbol of this change. On Jeddah, the Holy City, once a center of Force tradition, was occupied and later destroyed by the Empire. The Kyber crystal caves of Ilum, sacred to generations of Jedi, were strip-mined by the Empire and eventually transformed into Starkiller Base by the First Order. The legacy of Order 66 extends into the physical remains of the old Jedi Order. The Jedi Temple archives, painstakingly collected over millennia, was largely destroyed or sequestered in secret Imperial vaults. Recovered records show that what wasn't destroyed was carefully filtered and modified, creating an approved Imperial version of history that would influence generations to come. For the few surviving Jedi Masters, like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, Order 66 forced a fundamental reconsideration of the Jedi way. Their exile wasn't just about survival. It was a time of deep reflection on how the Order had failed to see the threat growing within the Republic. Their personal records, later recovered, show how they grappled with these questions while watching over the next generation of hope. The impact on planetary governments provides another measurable legacy. Worlds that had once hosted Jedi temples or enclaves faced a choice: destroy all evidence of their Jedi heritage or face Imperial retribution. Places like Jeddah, historically significant to Force users across the galaxy, paid the ultimate price for maintaining their connections to these traditions. Order 66 stands as more than just a moment in history. It represents a dividing line between two distinct eras of galactic civilization. Before Order 66, the Jedi stood as guardians of peace and justice for over 1,000 generations. After it, the very memory of their existence became dangerous knowledge, passed down in whispers and hidden texts. The galaxy would never again view military loyalty, spiritual traditions, or political power in quite the same way. The betrayal was too complete, too efficient, too devastating to ever be forgotten. Even decades later, with the Empire fallen and a new republic risen, the echoes of Order 66 continue to influence every aspect of galactic society. As we've explored in this documentation of Order 66, its effects rippled far beyond the immediate military action. From the personal tragedies of individual Jedi and clones to the grand sweep of galactic politics, from the fate of ancient temples to the foundation of new governments, Order 66 left an indelible mark on history.